The most popular profile is the Nisa channel profile, or the shadow gap as some people call it. And that's mainly because it's a profile that people run the boards, you run the boards vertically. And the reason why you run the boards vertically with a shadow board, it means that you don't have any dirt or collecting on the shelf. If you were to put that board horizontally, yes, you could fit it horizontally, but what you're creating is a shelf for the water or the dirt to collect on and then drip down the board and possibly stain the board as the dirt accumulates on the shelf, and water would sit on it. So all profiles need to be installed where they can shed water. So when it rains, the water just runs straight off without pausing and without sitting there and creating any dirt stains or anything like that. So there's a number of different profiles, things like the Vera, Viola are standard profiles that you would run horizontally. The Nisa is one of the most popular for vertical use. Generally, when you fit cladding, you should always allow a small amount of gap, say at 1 to 2 millimeters at the most between each board, especially when they're being fitted externally, to allow for possible movement of moisture to uptake on the board, so that you don't have, if you fit the boards really tight together and they're quite dry when they're fitted, then any moisture uptake that it tries to take on board just puts more pressure on the board and consequently the fixings, and it could end up popping out or bowing slightly. So you should always allow a small amount of movement, and you can easily apply that by just putting a small spacer on the end of each board just to give it a little bit of a slight elevation, and then you won't have any problems with the changing climate conditions in this country. Nisa is the most popular and is the best board to use for vertical applications. I think it's Vera, Viola, any profile that effectively doesn't create a water trap. So if you have a look at our profile sheets, we have about 9 different profiles. Then just pick a profile that allows the water to run off it as opposed to trap it. The general rule of thumb, in the old days, most people would, when they use timber cladding, would just have the same size board and would just run it horizontally. But these days, with all the different profiles and options that you have available, then you would run them vertically if you want to exaggerate the height of a building, if you want to exaggerate its height, say like a gable end, or if you wanted to soften the height of a building, then you would run it horizontally, because your eye generally picks up the lines in the board, the straight lines. So that would be the general rule of thumb. There's no reason why you couldn't mix. You could have vertical on the end of a house on a gable end, but you could run them horizontally on another elevation. You don't generally see more than 1, maybe 2 elevations at a time. So think about the style and the design that you're looking for and what you're trying to achieve, and what other people will see on that project when they walk up the drive, for example, or drive into the drive. Then if you've got a gable end, then sometimes it's really nice to have it as a vertical board rather than soften it. Other scenarios could come up whereby the planning want you to soften the height of the building, so therefore by running horizontally it would artificially soften it without you having to physically drop the roof height. But that's obviously something you'd have to discuss with planning, but those are the general rules. The other option for fitting cladding is creating a fin style, so an L-shape profile. We would suggest that the board that you want sticking out from the building, you could screw to the side of the facing board, and then what you're doing then in creating a letter L, and then you would just leave about a 2 mil gap, 1 or 2 mil gap before you do the next board. So you would create those pieces first, and then you would fix those up to the wall onto the cladding battens. So you're building sections in sort of letter L sections. If you want to run horizontal boards, pick a profile that has a slope or an angle deflection, so that when you look at it, you can see where the water will run off that board at an angle, and in which case that would be more than suitable. What you don't want is a profile that has a shelf where it looks like the water could sit on it, because then that could create unnecessary water staining. We would always advise using stainless fixings, whether that's stainless finishing pins or stainless screws. If you're generally going to fix cladding and you don't really want to see the fixings, then we would always recommend you fixing these through the bottom corner of a profile, whichever that profile might be. If you fit them, you put the fixing through at about 45-degree angle into the cladding batten. It's a personal choice thing. We would always recommend using screws because they have a better holding power. But if you have a builder that particularly wants to use ring shank stainless, as long as they're stainless and not galvanised, then you could use finishing pins as long as they're at least 50 millimetres long, so you've got plenty of pin into the batten so that it holds it in place.